The Bikeriders, starring Austin Butler as Benny, Jodie Comer as Kathy, and Tom Hardy as Johnny, was a pretty good movie, and it had a lot more to say than I thought it would have. You've also got side characters that you'll recognize, like Norman Reedus, Michael Shannon, Boyd Holbrook, maybe Damon Harriman if you've seen Justified. And the movie itself is a really simple story, but the characters are what make it interesting. The movie is based on the book of the same title, and the book is based on the actual motorcycle gang called the Outlaws. And the quick history of it is the Outlaws existed from like the 1930s, but then kind of disbanded. And the character portrayed by Tom Hardy in the movie starts a motorcycle club. In the movie, they're called the Vandals, but the book is based on the Outlaws. The author of the book went and photographed and recorded audio from the gang starting in 1965 for about 4 years. And they actually show photographs of the real people at the end of the movie. And I guess you can hear the audio online too. I haven't gone to listen to it yet. Obviously, all the performances in the movie are really good. I thought it was a little bit slow to get going, but after about half an hour, once it really gets going, it's a good movie. The violence in this type of movie is always very ground level, fist fights and blunt objects and that sort of thing, which I feel like makes it more brutal in some ways than a really over-the-top show or movie. The main things that I want to talk about are sort of the themes and messages that the movie touches on, because the story itself is very straightforward, but the movie touches on a lot of interesting topics, such as honor culture, men who are displaced in society, how these groups devolve the way that they do into violence, how these kind of gangs view and treat women. And I really like the character work for Johnny and Benny in particular, so I want to talk about that as well. So let's just get into it. The whole premise of the movie is that Johnny, played by Tom Hardy, starts this motorcycle club that Benny is a part of, who's Austin Butler's character, and his wife, Kathy, is talking about what the gang was like. So she's talking to the journalist, and you're getting her recollection of events and sort of what happened from 1965 to 1973. What you're really seeing is the devolvement of the club from kind of just a men's hangout into an actual full-blown gang. So all the characters are based on the real people, and they use their actual dialogue, and their personalities inspired the characters. It sounds like Johnny is the most inaccurate, which is Tom Hardy. But overall, the narrative is constructed to kind of tie the story together for a movie. Typical Hollywood, no big deal. The movie itself is really simple. I want to talk more about the themes and the topics that the movie touches on, because I found those a lot more interesting than the actual plot itself, because the plot itself is very direct. So there's going to be a lot of spoilers. One of the things that I think is really the crux of the movie is that this place Johnny started out as kind of just a men's hangout for guys to drink beers, ride bikes, race their motorcycles. And one of the ways that they show this throughout the movie is they have these picnics every so often. And you can see at the beginning of the picnics, there's kids there, all the wives and girlfriends are there. They're all just kind of drinking and hanging out. And as the movie goes on, they get more and more wild. So if there's people having sex on tables, you don't really see the kids there. The newer generation of the gang members, which are the ones really escalating the violence, come in. And a lot of the newer gang members are supposed to be Vietnam veterans, so they're shooting up heroin and stuff. So you just really see this slow progression over the course of the 8 years in the movie from kind of just a boys' club into a gang. They also expand and take in other branches. So a big part of it too is that Johnny had full control of it when it started, and then he just loses control of it as the movie progresses. And the reason I think this is interesting is because the movie makes a point at the beginning to interview like each of the members and ask them why they joined. Most of them are just like, I just want to ride my bike. I just want to hang out. Kathy, who's giving it from her perspective, refers to a lot of them as bums. And it's interesting because Johnny, who started the club, was inspired by a Marlon Brando movie called The Wild One. And it really is just like them hanging out at a bar, drinking. They're a bit rowdy. It's a lot of guys that are outcast. And that's sort of what you see is one of the big kind of themes of the movie, I think. These young men who are ostracized by society, or at least feel like outcasts, join this club because they don't really have anywhere else to go. They need somewhere to fit in. But because they don't really have anything to do, they also tend to get into fights a lot. They're very destructive. You see in the movie, all the ones that are the most normal are the guys that have families and wives and kids, actual jobs. As the movie progresses, you see the younger guys also have really messed up family backgrounds, and they're a lot more dangerous. They're a lot more violent. So I think the core of the movie is really a commentary on young men and just outcasts in general without somewhere to fit in. When they're doing their little interviews, Brucey, who's one of the original guys, one of the close ones to Johnny, says, a lot of people associate bike riding with danger and kind of lowlifes and they need someone to bully. And he's like, why wouldn't it be us, right? Like, we don't have anything else. I think it gives good insight into how people get into these lifestyles. One of the best parts of the movie is Michael Shannon's character is talking about his brother. His brother went to college for a year and he keeps calling him a pinko. He goes, you go off to college and then come back with something wrong in your head. Come back wearing shorts and shoes, can't work with your hands, that kind of thing. You see how these cultures sort of breed habits that are unsuccessful in Western society. Not that you have to go to college to be successful, but there's this mindset of, why would you ever need to leave here or leave your family, that type of thing. Later on in the movie, when Michael Shannon's drunk, he's talking about how he actually wanted to go fight in Vietnam. And they told him no, that he was an undesirable character. And he admits that he cried when he got rejected. So you see that his kind of jealousy with his brother stems from his own displacement in society. So this is a really interesting thing you see just throughout the movie. One of the other things this movie really touches on that drives it is honor culture versus dignity culture. To put it in the simplest terms, dignity culture, you're looking at more of not worrying about the context. You kind of look at the individual and their worth, and you don't worry about people disrespecting you or talking trash about you or whatever. Honor culture is more of your social worth is based on reputation, and it depends on others. So this mentality of honor culture is what the movie really focuses on, because that's the attitude that's pretty prolific, obviously, in gangs and places that rely more on violence and that sort of thing. Throughout the movie, you see it where if someone gets disrespected, they fight. And the movie starts off in this scene in the picture right here, where they want Austin Butler to take off his jacket, and he says, "You'll have to kill me." So then they fight. It's a much more violent and kind of savage mentality than probably upper class people are used to, and they can't really understand it. So you see this escalation of violence just throughout the movie. The part in the image here is from the trailer where Brucey asks, "What about the bar?" And Tom Hardy says, "Burn it down." Like, it's like that kind of mentality. And this also really contributes to the escalation of violence that you see throughout the movie. You know, if someone disrespects you and beats you up with their fist, well, you might consider stabbing them. And if someone got stabbed, you might consider shooting them. And it's just this escalation that I think is still pretty reflected in today's gangs, obviously, with the amount of violence that goes on there. Something else the movie doesn't shy away from is the way that women are treated in these circles. Some of them have spouses and wives, but pretty often at these parties, you'll see women that are just there for sex. And there'll be a couple women with 50 dudes. Even Kathy, the main woman, in the opening scene, she talks about wearing white pants to meet the Vandals for the first time. And when she left the bar, there was like handprints all over the ass and they were all dirty. Another interesting thing that was touched on was kind of the lack of a father figure and how it leads to young men needing these environments and how they kind of fill the void with people who end up being bad influences, really. In the movie, Benny's family never gets talked about. We see a little bit of Johnny's family, but he's very detached from them. They only show him in a couple scenes and they kind of don't talk. He's a truck driver, so he's out of the house a lot. Obviously, he's with the club a lot. And since we never see Benny's family and Johnny doesn't really interact with his family much, he doesn't have a son, you see this kind of father-son dynamic between Benny and Johnny. And at the beginning of the movie, Kathy says that she thinks that Johnny wanted what Benny always had, which was to be carefree. Just to be able to ride your bike and live without responsibility. I think the other part that's not explicitly stated is sort of the nostalgia for when life was simpler. And we see this from Johnny's character, both the way that he interacts with Benny, he is kind of envious of him. But then as the gang is moving on in years, you know, they're losing members, people are getting older, people are leaving, people are dying in just bike accidents. He gets frustrated that the younger kids won't listen. They won't kind of grow up the way that they all did. And there's a nostalgia for sort of just a simpler time with less burdens in life, is how I took it. For Benny, obviously, he doesn't really have a father. So he always kind of looks up to Johnny, and Johnny's not particularly a good influence on him throughout the movie. And then you see also some of the other kids who are part of a different group in the gang. They all have messed up family lives. I think the movie does a good job of showing that in these kind of lower income, more desperate situations, young men will turn to gangs for security and for leadership. Maybe if you're a little bit more well off or in a more safe place, you might look up to like Andrew Tate or whoever. But either way, I think there's a lot of parallels to sort of the void of men to look up to and where young boys will turn when they don't have options. and certainly not good options. And I also wanted to mention for Johnny's character, we see him say he wants Benny to take over the gang. He's like, I can't do this forever, and they're only going to follow someone that they respect. So again, it's kind of harping on that honor culture mentality. And Benny declines. There comes a point later in the movie where he essentially says, I'm scared of what this gang is becoming. They're escalating the violence and destruction and negative aspects of the culture. And then near the end of the movie, he has a conversation with Kathy, and he says, he's like, sometimes you can put everything you have into something, really do the best you can, and it doesn't matter. It's still going to do what it's going to do. And it's pretty obviously him reflecting on what the gang has become because it just grew so unruly that he couldn't control it. It was a sort of Frankenstein's monster situation, and that no matter what he did, he just couldn't rein it in to get it back to what it was. And for her, that conversation is reflective of her relationship with Benny because their relationship is super toxic. She talks about how he has no emotions, presumably because of his family situation, whatever it was. And he's very manipulative with their relationship where whenever she's like, I'm worried about you, he's like, okay, I'll just leave then. Kind of just to get her to say, okay, don't worry. So in that conversation, Tom Hardy is talking about both what happened with him and the gang and what happened with her and Benny, and sort of how you can't control everything and some things are just going to be how they are. So I'm going to leave it here for this movie. Like I said, I thought it was a pretty good movie, but I thought a lot of the themes and messages were really interesting and pretty relevant to current society. So if you're still here, I try to stream Sundays at noon. Sometimes I do it randomly as well. If you've seen the movie, comment, let me know what you think. I try to respond to all the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.